Hello, welcome to this walkthrough of Mastery Exam AA Practice Version 1, Problem 7. Here, just like in Problem 6, we're asked to find all the solutions to an equation. What makes this different is that the equation is a little harder to think about. X cubed minus x equals 0. It's not just a simple linear function. So how do we do this? Before we talk about how we do this, let's talk about a couple of common mistakes in how students will sometimes approach this kind of problem. One approach is the guess and check approach. The students will just guess values of x and try them and just list the ones that work. That's not necessarily a bad thing, except that we often miss solutions that aren't totally obvious. For example, if you were guessing and checking, one of the first values of x you might try is x equals 0. And indeed, if I go through and try out 0 cubed minus 0 on the left-hand side, I do get 0. And so that x equals 0 actually is a solution. Some students also go on to try x equals 1, and if you try that out, you can check that 1 cubed minus 1 does in fact equal 0. So we have x equals 0 and x equals 1. And a lot of students will do this and stop, and that's the problem. Guessing and checking often leaves out solutions that are not totally obvious guesses, and that makes it wrong. Okay, mastery exams require 100% mastery, so if you have just 2 out of 3 solutions, that's not good enough. In fact, we're missing a solution. There's a third one involved here that we didn't guess, and maybe you wouldn't think to guess that either. So we don't want to guess and check necessarily. Before we talk about how we do go about solving this problem, here's another approach. This is closer to the truth, and that would just be simply to use some algebra. So let's start by writing down the equation we're going to solve, x cubed minus x equals 0. Now, using algebra is the right idea here, but here's a step that students often do that gets them into trouble. It's not this one. I can add x to both sides, and that's okay. But here's the problem. When students go on to then divide off by x. Okay, divide both sides by x. Now, dividing both sides of an equation by the same thing is okay as long as the thing you're dividing by is not 0. Now, x could possibly be 0, right? I mean, we did see just a second ago that, in fact, x equals 0 is one of the solutions. But let's go with this and to see where it leads us. On the left-hand side, that simplifies to x squared. On the right, it simplifies to 1. And this will give us 2 solutions. It will give us x equals 1, which we already checked was a solution, and also x equals negative 1. This was the solution that we missed by guess and check. But you know what? We're missing one other solution, aren't we? We're missing the solution x equals 0. What happened to it? Where did it go? Well, it went away right here. When I divide by x, x could potentially be 0. And so when I divide by it, I lose that 0 solution. So there's 2 things we want to avoid in this problem and any others like it. One of them is guess and check. It's not a bad way to start, but it's not a good way to actually solve a problem because, like I said, we often miss key solutions in the process because we don't always guess the right things. Another thing you want to always avoid is dividing by a variable. That almost always loses a solution that you need. Okay, so let's talk about how we would solve this problem correctly. Now, it is correct, like I said, to approach the problem with algebra, but I think the way that really works for us is to look at the left-hand side here and try to factor it as much as possible. Now, why factor? Well, we're going to see in just a second. So let's completely factor this, x cubed minus x. One of the things we see right off the bat in doing that is that both the terms here have a common factor of x on them. Okay, so I can factor that off, and I get x squared minus 1 left over. Now this expression right here might jog your memory. That can be factored too, and it factors actually into x minus 1, x plus 1. So now I've completely factored the left-hand side. And here's the deal. I have x times x minus 1 times x plus 1. 3 things multiplied together, and the whole thing equals 0. Now, the only way that can possibly happen is if one of these 3 things itself is equal to 0. So that gives me 3 possible options here. Either x is 0, or x minus 1 is 0, or x plus 1 is 0. Those are the only 3 things that can possibly happen, and each one of those 3 things gives me a solution. Here's one solution, x equals 0. This equation here gives me another solution, x equals 1, and this third equation here gives me the third and final solution, x equals negative 1. And in fact, these are my 3 solutions. Those are my answers that I would put in the blank, 0, 1, and minus 1. 0, 1, and minus 1. Those are all the solutions, and there are no others because anything else would make this product not equal to 0. Okay, so we want to use algebra, but we don't want to divide by a variable because that loses a solution. What we do want to do is factor and use properties of arithmetic to conclude something about the x values. We don't want to guess and check either because, like I said, all the times we just don't check the things that aren't obvious. It's just human nature. So that's it for this problem. 0, plus or minus 1 are my solutions. You do want to, go back and maybe on the back side of the mastery exam form, check each of these 3 solutions in the left-hand side and make sure you get 0 as well. We won't do that because that was actually part of the guessing and checking stuff we saw earlier.